I don't talk about this trip much anymore. Maybe because no one believes it, or maybe because I still haven't pieced together the parts that make sense from the ones that absolutely don't. I keep circling back to that night like I'm still there, still in those woods. It was 2 years ago, early autumn. Me and my best friend Josh were doing a long weekend hiking trip through a semi-wild area of Wales right on the fringe of Snowdonia. We were both into outdoor stuff, and this area was one of those sweet spot places. Less traveled, but still accessible if you knew where to cut off the marked trails. Josh had read on a hobbyist forum about a hidden stone circle deep in the forest. Not one of the famous ones, just old local lore, folklore-level stuff passed down without any tourism hoopla. Supposed to be pre-Roman, or maybe just Victorian farmers messing around, no one really knows. That mystery was what made us want to find it. Not some haunted folklore tale, just the idea of stumbling across something ancient and forgotten. We packed light, tent, water filters, food, headlamps. First day was uneventful. Beautiful, in fact. Cold air, golden light, and not another soul around. Took us the better part of the day to get to the rough coordinates Josh had saved on his phone. By the time we reached it, the sun was tipping into late afternoon. It was real. A ring of waist-height standing stones, maybe 12 or 13 of them in a rough circle around a clearing, covered in moss and lichens. Some had clearly fallen over, and a few leaned heavily. You wouldn't notice it unless you were really trying to find it. Nature nearly reclaimed the whole thing. We set up camp just outside the ring, right near a fallen log that made a good seating area. Josh was stoked. He kept pacing around, taking blurry photos and trying to act like he knew anything about ancient geometry. I just liked the vibe, quiet, cold, a little eerie in that way all deep woods are, but here's where it began to feel off. As night came on, something shifted. It was nothing overt, just one of those things you only notice after sitting still for a while. The woods, which had been so alive with sound earlier, leaves rustling, the occasional bird call, went entirely unsettlingly quiet. No insects. No wind. No distant owls. It hit me when we were sitting beside the campfire later that night. We were both eating from our little mess kits, and I realized I hadn't heard a single branch snap or leaf fall in over an hour. "Do you hear anything?" I asked Josh, lowering my spoon. He looked around. "No, that was all he said. But it was more than just quiet. It was still. Like something had paused the whole forest. We tried to shake it off. Added more wood to the fire, poured tiny shots of whiskey, joked about forest banshees or badger cults. Dumb stuff. We didn't want to go in the tent just yet, but we also didn't want to admit we were spooked. The moment I'll never forget came maybe half an hour later, when Josh froze mid-sentence and stared past me. "What?" I asked. I thought he'd heard something. He didn't answer, just raised his finger and pointed, his face pale in the firelight. About 15 feet away, just outside the ring of stones, there was a man standing between two upright stones, just standing, no flashlight, no bag, no visible gear, not even any movement. Just someone in dark clothing, hands by his sides, barely silhouetted by the firelight, completely motionless. Like he'd been there the whole time, but didn't want us to see him right away. I stood up slowly and called out, "Hey, you all right?" It came out weird, nervous. The guy didn't answer. Josh pulled out his flashlight and pointed it at the figure, but the beam just barely reached him. The trees behind the ring cast long broken shadows, and all it did was make him look stranger. His face in shadow, shape barely distinguishable, no movement. "Maybe he's lost," Josh muttered, lowering the light. "Or sleepwalking." We both stood there, watching, waiting. Then, so slowly we almost didn't register it, the man took a step, not toward us, but around the circle. He didn't cross through the stones or speak. He just started pacing clockwise, moving behind the next stone, then the next. His steps were stiff and measured, almost too exact. Always staying just outside the fire's reach, Josh whispered, "What the fuck is he doing?" I wanted to grab our gear and leave right then. But the whole situation felt like a trap, a surreal one. Who hikes this deep into the woods at night? No light, no sign of other campers. And why circle around us like that? We decided to wait. Just wait it out. If he got closer, we'd tell him to back off. If he left, great, but he didn't leave. He kept walking silently around the perimeter of the stone circle, clockwise again and again, Josh and I sat back down near the fire, but neither of us could relax. We kept watching the dark shapes between the stones, trying to guess where he'd reappear next. Sometimes we'd catch a glimpse, his shoulder sliding behind a stone or just the faint crunch of soil underfoot. We didn't sleep. We just sat there in silent dread as this man completed laps around us. It wasn't threatening exactly. It was just wrong. A couple times he disappeared for long stretches. I'd think maybe he's gone. Then just as I was starting to believe that, I'd glance up, and there he was again. Paused behind a leaning stone, like he'd been watching the whole time. At some point, probably past 4 a.m., we both must have dozed off, just for a second, because I remember snapping awake just before sunrise. Cold, numb, fingers stiff. Josh was asleep and shivering beside me, his jacket half off. The fire had burned low, so I shot up and looked around the stones. No one. The man was gone. I woke Josh. We both did a fast pack-up, checking the dew-soaked ground and surroundings. No footprints. No signs of anyone walking, not even ours. That's what still gets me. It had rained the day before. The soil had softened. We left muddy boot prints everywhere from arriving, exploring, even stumbling around during the night. There should have been his too. All around the perimeter. Nothing, just ours. I tried to write it off. Sleep deprivation. Hallucination. Deep fear does weird things to the brain, but Josh remembers it, exactly like I do. The same man. The same pacing. The sound of steady footsteps moving behind the stones. We don't hike out that way anymore. We stopped researching stone circles after that trip too. There's never been any official listing of one at those coordinates. Not online, not in any of the folklore books we checked afterward. Almost like it never existed. But I know what we saw. And whoever or whatever was circling our camp that night never made a sound when he left. This happened back in late July 2021. I was on week 3 of a solo road trip through the Pacific Northwest, mostly back roads, small coastal towns, quiet spots I'd pinned on Google Maps over the years. The idea was to disconnect for real for once. No hotels, no Wi-Fi, just my car, a tent, and whatever public campgrounds had space that night. That night I landed at a campground just off a mountain lake in Oregon. I won't name the exact one. I almost did just now. But I'll say it wasn't a national park, just a less trafficked state-run site that someone recommended on Reddit. I pulled in late, maybe 20 minutes before sundown. The air was still warm, that kind of stiff July heat that's still clinging to everything, even as the shadows grow longer. There were tall pines lining the road in, and the lake sat still and glassy off to the right, almost too perfect. You could hear nothing but someone's radio 2 sites over, softly playing Fleetwood Mac. A kid laughing somewhere faintly down the trail. Nothing unnatural, only 4 or 5 sites were occupied. That caught my attention. It was summer, high season. Campgrounds should have been full, but the loop road was mostly empty. I figured maybe it was just remote enough to miss the summer rush. I didn't think twice about it. Not yet. Near the entrance there was one of those wooden info boards with stapled notices, camp rules, fire bans, all that. I was about to park and check the box for envelopes when a man came out of the ranger's outpost next to it. He was tall, thin, with white hair that looked yellow at the tips, like it had been dyed blonde at some point and then forgotten. His name tag read George Camp Host. I remember that because it was written in all caps in red Sharpie, not typed or printed like most name tags, and it was weirdly smeared on the bottom corner. He smiled as I got out of the car a bit too quickly, like he'd been waiting inside for me to show up. "You got good timing," he said immediately. Not many spots left, and that was my first pause. The place looked virtually empty. I glanced around, trying not to seem rude. "Almost full?" I asked. "Getting there," he nodded. "But I've got a good one for you. Private number 9. You'll like it." There was something about how he said it. Not friendly, not aggressive, just certain, like I didn't have a choice. He handed me a permit and a site map already marked in pen. Normally you pick your site, fill out the stub, slot your envelope, all that. But not here. George had it all ready. Like he'd known I'd show up at that exact time and already planned where I'd go. I remember being oddly hesitant to say anything else. I just nodded and thanked him, then drove down the loop. Site number 9 was near the edge of the tree line. not too far from the lake, but enough woods behind it to give a cocoon kind of feeling. Dense quiet. I set the tent quickly just as the sun disappeared behind the hills, and the ring of daylight left everything kind of bruised purple. That's when things started to turn. Across from my spot, 2 sites diagonally across the loop road, was a family packing up. Not packing like for the night either. Packing like in a rush. They were rushing to get a tarp folded, kids already in the SUV, cooler banging against the bumper. As the dad tried to bungee it down, the mom glanced up at me, then back at her husband, shaking her head. At the time, I assumed they were just fighting or had a change of plans. That kind of second-hand awkwardness you want to ignore. But looking back, I really wish I had gone over and said something. By full dark, the campground felt static, silent. Even the lake didn't make noise. No frogs, no bugs, no wind through the pines. Just quiet, thick and unnatural. I stayed in the tent a while, scrolling offline maps and reading. Around maybe 10:15, I heard a knock. Just once. A single blunt tap on my tent wall about knee height from the ground. Not the zipper area. The side. I froze. My hand hovered over the flashlight. Then I called out calmly, "Hello?" Nothing. I unzipped the flap slightly and peeked out. Darkness. My sight was as I'd left it. Chair, water jug, shoes lined up. No one visible. Then I heard it again. Same knock, but this time it wasn't my tent. It was the one a few sites down, maybe space number 6 or number 5. A single knock, then maybe 20 seconds of silence, then another knock, a little louder. Another tent. There weren't many of us in the loop, I think 4 or 5 tents total, and I swear he was going one by one, site by site, slowly testing, not their doors, not calling out, just knocking. I turned off my flashlight. My whole body was ice. I lay frozen, trying to rationalize it. Maybe George was checking for fire safety, but no one checks like that. Not at 10:30 at night. Not without saying who they are. 15 minutes passed. Maybe more. I kept waiting for my turn again. Then it happened, one knock low, directly on my left side. Same pressure, same rhythm. Then nothing. I didn't breathe. I didn't move for longer than I can count. Then a second knock. Same place. That was the last one. I barely slept. Every car noise on the distant highway jolted me. Every snapping twig sent my adrenaline surging. At one point I thought I heard whispering, but I couldn't tell if it was in my ears or outside. I waited inside my tent until the sky started going grey-blue. Didn't even unzip it until I could see shapes clearly. When I finally stepped out, I braced myself for something out of place. But the campground looked ordinary. Morning birds were chirping. Sunlight scattered through the pines. A woman walked her dog near the trail. No sign of George. His little outpost was closed up, window shuttered, notice board cleared. Like no one had been there for weeks, and this next part stuck with me. As I drove out, I passed a ranger vehicle coming in. Real one, state badge, uniformed guy in the driver's seat. I flagged him down, pretending it was about the fire ban. Then I casually mentioned George, the camp host who checked me in. The ranger looked confused. "There hasn't been a host here since last fall," he said. "That station hasn't been staffed all summer." I asked him to confirm. Told him George had checked me in personally. Gave me the map, assigned site number 9. He gave me this skeptical half smile. "The campground is first come, self-check-in. Always has been." I drove in silence the rest of the day. To this day, I don't know who knocked. I don't know where the man with the red Sharpie name tag came from, or how long he'd been watching campers. But I do know this, he didn't want me picking my own site. He wanted to know exactly which tent to knock on. I still catch myself trying to sort out the timeline. Who was awake when, which shifts we took on watch. What screams were real? What sounds came from inside the tent? And what came from the trees? This was late September 2018, a team building weekend organized by our company's HR department. One of those disconnect and reconnect with nature things where they try to convince mid-level co-workers to bond over campfires instead of emails. 4 of us went. Me, Josh, not the same Josh as the earlier story. Different guy, Clara, our social media lead. Devon, analytics, quiet guy. Priya, HR, the one who organized the trip. I wasn't close with any of them really, but I liked camping, so I volunteered when the email came around. It was something about hiking and reflecting, and maybe a little too much mindfulness energy, but I figured, free trip. 2 nights, nothing intense. The place was a private land parcel up in northern Ontario. Some company had a lease on it and was experimenting with wilderness retreats. There were marked trails, and they said we could camp virtually anywhere on the east side. Away from the old logging roads, we arrived on a Friday afternoon, parked at a locked gate, and hiked in about 3 kilometers with full packs. The woods were stunning, auburn leaves, long dusky shadows, air so silent you could hear someone take a shallow breath across the clearing. We found a flat grassy spot surrounded by wild birches and pitched the tents, 2 tents actually. Girls in one, guys in the other. No cell service, but we had downloaded trail maps and brought battery backups. The woods felt safe enough. That first night everything was fine. We cooked foil packs, told dumb stories, laughed at how painfully forced fun this whole retreat was. I remember Priya kept saying we should do breathing exercises, even as she sipped wine from a Nalgene bottle. Around midnight or so, we all went to our tents. I had just zipped mine shut when I heard a single sharp breath, like someone gasping, outside. Clara called out immediately, "Dev? Was that you?" I poked my head out. "Nope." Devon's head popped out beside mine. He shook his head. "Was about to ask you guys. There were no other campers out there, none. We were the only group scheduled for the property that weekend. Priya had said so more than once. We shone our lights around, nothing. No branches snapped, no rustling. Eventually we laughed it off. People breathe, right? Maybe one of us had accidentally sighed too close to the tent wall, and it echoed weirdly. Nothing to freak out about. We all went back to sleep. Night 2 was the bad one. Daytime started well. We hiked a few trails, had lunch near a dried creek bed, took photos. Eventually we found this strange loop on the GPS, a trail that wasn't marked on any current maps, but showed up on Devon's downloaded topographic files. It had no name, just a loop offshoot marked in faded lines. We joked about it being Hollow Trail, the haunted side route. Just a dumb title to add some flavor. We didn't take it. It didn't look maintained. Tall grass, no signage. Instead, we logged it as something funny and creepy, took a couple selfies near the entrance, and headed back to camp before dusk. That night, the air felt wrong from the start. Not cold, not stormy, just stale. Like everything in the forest had stopped moving, even though the fire still cracked and shifted. Around 10 p.m. you could tell nobody wanted to say it, but we were all looking at the trees more than usual. Devon barely touched his food. Priya kept shuffling her feet. Clara played music on her phone, softly at first, and then louder, as if volume could keep our nerves down. We called it a night early. Probably 10:45. I lay in the tent with Devon, staring up at nothing, refusing to close my eyes. That's not something I usually deal with. I've camped alone before, slept through wild thunderstorms and animal sounds, but something this time didn't feel explainable. It started slowly, a sound just outside the tent, breathing. Too human, too close. But when I unzipped the flap and looked, nothing. Not a single shadow moving. I turned to Devon to say something, and before the words left my mouth, we both heard it. A soft, muffled whimpering, like someone crying, or trying very hard not to. It was coming from the trees, 20 or 30 feet behind our girl's tent. I blinked at Devon, whose eyes were wide in the dark. A single word mouthed, "Clara?" I grabbed the flashlight and slipped on my boots. Devon joined me silently. We crept out and aimed the light past the tents. I wish I could say we saw something. I do, but we didn't. No person, no animal, just empty trees. We called out quietly, "Clara? Priya?" No response. I whispered to Devon, "Let's check on them." We crossed the soft moss toward their tent and crouched beside it. Inside, 2 voices were breathing steady, slow, asleep. Clara and Priya were there. Sound asleep. So who was crying? We stepped back and searched the woods until we lost the nerve to keep going. It wasn't until we returned to the fire ring that I noticed footprints in the dirt. A few meters from camp, near the dense trees where the sound had come from. Not one direction, circles, small narrow feet, barefoot, overlapping prints like someone was walking in slow, wide loops. Just out of sight, we woke up the girls without hesitation. Clara was pissed, confused. Priya looked freaked out even before we said anything. I asked if either had gotten up. Clara swore they hadn't moved. None of us slept after that. We set up a rotating watch, used our phone clocks and stayed in pairs. That's how we found out about the GPS glitch. Devon was on the second watch around 3 a.m. The rest of us were dead-eyed around the fire, waiting for daylight. Devon shouted suddenly, cranky and surprised. "My GPS is wrong," he said. "It says I left the tent 20 minutes ago." He showed us the track line. His phone showed a janky path leading away from camp and looping back, like he'd gotten up and walked barefoot through the woods. But he didn't. I was literally sitting across from him the entire time we checked mine. Showed the same loop, only shorter, 5 minutes off by 10 feet. Clara's showed an identical pattern, a midnight loop. Priya's was the worst, a jagged path that led directly to the mouth of the unmarked trail, the one we joked about, Hollow Trail. I felt sick. At sunrise, we packed what we could and left most of the gear behind. None of us spoke as we hiked back to the gate. It took longer than expected. The path out felt wrong, the GPS map occasionally flipping directions or freezing altogether. When we made it back to cell range, our phones buzzed like crazy. But none of us looked at them until we were out of the car, well away from the woods. That was the last time I saw Priya. She left the company 3 weeks later, no goodbye, no resignation email. Devon transferred departments, and Clara unfollowed me on everything and has never replied to my texts since. As for me, I stayed in cities after that. Still camp sometimes, but only in open places. Never without service, never close to unmarked trails. We asked the trail company later about the glitch. They said GPS interference sometimes happens near old mining land, but there were no active mines near there. One of the guy's emails ended with, "There are areas even signal can't explain."